I remember many years ago seeing an advertisement on TV. And this advertisement, it opened by showing a long, dark road in Cairo. And a voiceover in the background said, a man was picked up here and he was beaten to death for criticizing Egyptian police brutality. And then the scene switched to a long, dark road in Nigeria. And a voiceover in the background said, a man was picked up here and executed for criticizing the oil industry in Nigeria. And then the ad just went silent. And against a very black backdrop, you could read in white letters, for company and country abuses of human rights, read the Times. Now at the time, this was the mid-1990s. At the time, this ad struck me as very odd, but it was actually a symbol of an incredibly consequential change that was taking place in our society. So there was a time when only governments had to really be concerned with human rights. You know, it was governments that made human rights commitments and signed international human rights treaties and then were criticized when they failed to live up to those. But companies, on the other hand, they were seen as pretty irrelevant to human rights. These were commercial actors. But then in just a few short years, that whole understanding was turned on its head. And what that Times advertisement was showing us was a growing global awareness that companies, even if they're framed as commercial actors, they have incredible impacts on human rights. So now let's fast forward 20 years to today. This field of human rights is one that has more clarity of expectations and unity of demands around it than any other for business in the field of sustainability. So we have the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which are one of the most universal and globally consistent agreements of our times. And yet, you know, businesses are still left with a question, and that is, what now? Because we have this agreement in principle, but the difficult part comes in implementation, in practice, in how you get human rights across complex business structures which involve dozens of countries and thousands of employees and tens of thousands of suppliers and joint venture arrangements with sometimes some pretty dodgy governments. And then you add onto that layer of complexity a whole nother layer of complexity, which is the fact that we're not just talking about labor rights issues anymore. So the whole field of human rights has come into play with business. So civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, these are exactly the types of challenges that BSR is working with its member companies to try to address. And we've heard every year for, I think, the last 6 years in a row in our annual survey with GlobeScan that human rights is the #1 issue area for our companies. And so we've decided to really ramp up our human rights work, but to do that in direct alignment with our company's needs. So I've spent the last 6 months on a listening tour with our companies. So convening BSR member companies in Paris and London and New York and San Francisco and Tokyo and other locations to really hear and understand your challenges. And what we came up with was really 3 core challenges and then 3 core areas of work for BSR to address those. And so what I'd like to share with you now is those core challenges and core areas of work. So the first message we heard from business was that, we do need help with this translation from the principle realm into the actual practice. So across that complex range of business structures and organizations and that complex range of rights. So the first work stream that BSR is developing is really focused on how we get good human rights due diligence in companies, how we provide all the tools, the policies, the trainings, the methodologies that companies need to really be sure that they are fully respecting and complying with human rights. But the second message we heard was that human rights isn't only a compliance issue for companies. That the really inspirational part for companies comes in going beyond and in helping to promote human rights. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because if you look at some of the biggest advances in human rights over the last 20 years, those have been made by companies. When you think about pharmaceutical companies and advancements in our right to health, or when you think about internet service providers and how they have provided a vehicle for freedom of expression in countries that are experiencing upheaval, like in the Arab Spring. But none of these companies have designed these as explicitly human rights outputs or projects. Companies aren't human rights organizations or actors, but what they were doing was finding that sweet spot where the interests of business and the interests of human rights meet. And that sweet spot is really the second work stream of BSR now. So we're looking at ways where we can strategically select and promote human rights that actually reinforce and help align with other business objectives. So whatever your business objectives, whether it's to increase employee loyalty or to get better brand recognition or to work in an area where the society is plagued by conflict, or to work more safely with a non-democratic regime. Whatever your business objectives, we can find a set of rights to promote which helps align and reinforce those business objectives at the same time as promoting human rights. Now, the third message we heard from business was that companies want to work with their peers to scale up their human rights impacts. It actually reminded me of a situation I had come across when I led a UN investigation mission into Mongolia. And every town I went to in Mongolia, whether it was in the capital, in Ulaanbaatar, or in remote nomadic herder communities in the Gobi Desert, every town I went into, I saw the exact same statue. So it was a statue of, there was an elephant at the bottom, and then standing on the elephant's back was a monkey. And then standing on the monkey's back was a rabbit. And then on top of the rabbit's back was a chicken. And then the chicken always had its beak pointed upwards. And finally, after I'd seen this statue like 24 times in every town I went into, I asked my interpreter what it was. And she said it was an ancient Mongolian proverb that was designed to depict the cooperation needed in a healthy society. So all of these animals had joined forces in order to reach some berries in a tree, which none of them could reach on their own. And it's a great metaphor for cooperation. But it's also one that I think we sometimes tend to forget it when we talk about the human rights impacts of companies. Because no company acts alone. No company operates in a vacuum or in isolation. All companies operate, whether they're big or small, they're all operating within an ecosystem, a wider setup of peer companies and suppliers and government regulators and community activists, and that ecosystem that they're working in can be geared in a way that is respectful of human rights, or in some countries it's geared in a way that systematically threatens and undermines human rights. Now, we consistently heard from companies that this was the area where they had the greatest challenge, but also the greatest sense of optimism. So optimism in that they could, within working in this wider ecosystem, they could affect more systemic level changes. So changes that would have impacts that went beyond their more granular level operational adjustments in human rights. But also working at this level, it's tricky. It's tricky in that you have to collaborate and work with partners that includes governments and NGOs, human rights organizations, which can have different levels of trust and transparency and different levels of objectives. And it can also be tricky in that if you're looking at getting, you kind of have to understand that wider dynamic of the system in order to get the outcomes from the interventions that you want, and also not to have unintended consequences from those interventions. So this is really the third work stream, or the third work area that BSR is building up with its member companies to try to help them address some of their core challenges in human rights. And it's an area we just recently launched, or I should say discussed, in a panel an hour ago, looking at how you use leverage with suppliers and government partners and others. But it's also an area where we will be launching a new collaborative initiative to help companies really exchange practices and learnings more in the future. So you can watch out for that collaborative initiative coming next year, early next year. Now, I want to take a step back and look then at all of our human rights work coming up with you, because these three work streams are really designed as steps to help our companies go for increased maturity and levels of ambition with human rights. So that first step is to get good due diligence systems within your companies. That's really a basic or a fundamental step, and that's one that all companies need to take. It's about respecting human rights. But that second step, to strategically work with human rights, particularly when they align with business objectives, that's one that we think most of our companies will want to take, because it makes good business sense to exploit all the opportunities that come your way, including those opportunities that come from the human rights field. And that third step, to work with your peers to affect greater level systemic change for advancements in human rights, that's one that not all companies will want to take. But it's one that actually speaks to the wider vision of the human rights field. And it's that wider vision that I want to end on today. Because, when human rights can often get caught up in the technicalities of the conventions and the legal cases, and behind all of those is a very simple vision. And it's one so simple that we tend to overlook it sometimes. And that is, when we talk about human rights, we're talking about the dignity and the value of every single person on our planet, whether they were born here in New York or whether they were born in Nigeria or Nicaragua. And human rights at that level is the only thing our world has which could rightly be called a global code of conduct on the ethical treatment of people for all actors. Now, these great universal values don't come true on their own, and they don't happen overnight. But our world has made huge strides in human rights in recent decades. If you look at it, nearly every human rights indicator has increased in the last 20 years, from children's access to education, to their right to clean drinking water, to the concept of non-discrimination spreading to every different human variation, differences in our skin colors and in our gender lines. But behind all those successful indicators are people who have worked tirelessly. People from human rights organizations and governments, yes, but also people from business. Business is one of the most powerful forces on our planet today. And at BSR, it's our goal, or indeed I should say it's our honor, to work with you to help align the powerful force of business to our universal values, to that fundamental respect for the dignity of human life. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. The second part of this special presentation is a very quick spotlight on BSR's collaborative initiatives. As you know, collaboration is absolutely critical to our influence strategy to drive change for a just and sustainable world. Such change takes time and effort, courage and commitment. It takes bold leadership, action, and partnership. But together with you, 2016 was a year marked with strong progress. More than 200 companies, and other stakeholders work with us in over 20 initiatives to implement collective actions to shared problems. For example, the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network continues to provide a bold leadership platform for business to play its key role in eliminating corruption. In the past 12 months, we've worked with ports and governments in Argentina, Egypt, Indonesia, and in Nigeria. The Clean Cargo Working Group, that represents over 85% of global container shipping capacity, came together behind a bold climate action statement to demand greater ambition from the International Maritime Organization. The Human Rights Working Group now reaches more companies than ever before. And we also joined in partnership with Forum for the Future and Shine to advance the bold action agenda of net positive, that business can deliver net positive social and environmental outcomes. This initiative focuses on creating common principles, methodologies, and case studies to actually quantify those impacts. Going into 2017, we'll continue to have over 20 initiatives that you can engage in on issues around climate adaptation and climate finance, healthy workforce, human rights, women's empowerment, and sustainable supply chains. We're also delighted to launch a new initiative in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation, the Global Impact Sourcing Coalition. This coalition is a corporate initiative to build a standard and good practices for how businesses can use their procurement to create job opportunities for vulnerable workers. I hope you take the opportunity at this conference to learn more about these initiatives, as well as explore new opportunities for collaboration that we can help you scale. In closing, we'd just like to show you a new 3-minute video that we made recently to highlight the importance of this work and encourage even greater participation for our collective success. Thank you. To successfully address global challenges, like climate change, ensuring the fulfillment of human rights, and creating inclusive societies, all requires collaboration. Collaboration between companies, with multi-stakeholder groups, and across whole value chains. The following experiences shared by some of our project partners highlight how BSR initiatives work to support the effective engagement between stakeholders and enables the co-creation of sustainable solutions.
Human rights is not an easy topic to discuss. It can be sensitive, it can be confidential, it can even be very emotive. But what BSR gives us through the Human Rights Working Group is an opportunity to share our challenges and our best practices. But best of all for Microsoft, an opportunity to learn from our fellow members to create new solutions.
At Marks & Spencer, we're absolutely committed to reducing carbon emissions right across our value chain, not only in our own operations, but including freight and transport around the world. To do this, we need standardised and aggregated data so we can compare supplier performance. We also need a forum where we can work with other brands, other retailers, freight and shipping companies to discuss new ideas and areas for improvement. This is where BSR's Clean Cargo Working Group supports us.
To tackle corruption, it is vital that we approach it on the supply and demand side of bribes. At the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, MACN, we do this by working with our members to improve their internal compliance program. And we also work with government officials and local authorities to improve our operating environment. We've made very strong progress in the last few years, and we will stay the course until such time we have a maritime industry that is free of corruption.
If we want inclusive development, we need to include women. And companies can play a major role here. For instance, if they invest in the working conditions of their female employees, these women will be more productive and be more competent in life. So we're investing in women's empowerment through platforms driven by BSR. As a Dutch government, we believe that collaboration between business, civil society and governments is key to inclusive development.
Collaboration is key to our future, but we also know that it's not easy. It raises many questions. How do we level the playing field? Who moves first? Who benefits? With 25 years of experience, we know how to deal with those questions. We know how to turn shared problems into collaborative solutions. Solutions that deliver tangible benefits to business and society. We look forward to working with you.